Welcome everyone. This is the third in a series of 5 classes called Life as Your Teacher, the Nuts and Bolts of Spirituality. So I'd like you to envision the opening scene of one of the oldest world scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita. So imagine you're on one side of a battlefield, and imagine you're Arjuna. He's the disciple of Krishna. Krishna is the charioteer. And Arjuna is looking at thousands of people on the other side of the battlefield, thousands on his side. On the other side are relatives of his. And he's questioning Krishna, why do I have to fight? So this is, I think, the most unusual scripture that there is. I don't think there's anything else close to this. But the whole thing is about the way that you go about doing what it is that you're doing. So the message in the Bhagavad Gita is, be not attached to the fruit of your actions. It's about the way that you go about your actions. So in this series, we're talking about our awakening as human divine beings. And of course, on our spiritual journey, we begin thinking of ourselves as separated, distant from not only the divine, but separated from whatever it is that we experience in the world. We're in a dualistic state of consciousness. And so we begin this journey with the thought in mind that we're trying to get somewhere. And for most traditions, the somewhere is somewhere not here, not in physical manifestation. It's to get back to God, get back to the transcendent, get back to beyond any name or form, beyond conditioning and so on. But manifestation has not been given a very good rap in many traditions. At best, in Hinduism, it's said to be the divine play. It's the dance of God. It's all God, which is true, but it's just the Leela. And then there's the cycles of creation. There's creation, there's preservation, there's destruction, then it starts all over again, over and over and over again. And in other traditions, manifestation is looked at as being an illusion. And this is true also in Hinduism. Maya, it's illusory. In Buddhism, it's just the false idea that we exist as an individual being, and we're trying to get off what's called the wheel of being and becoming to the nirvana, to some state beyond any type of description. And in Christianity, we're trying to be saved and we go to heaven. In yoga, the aim is to merge into the oneness, and there's no longer any separate name or form. In Sufism, in contrast to these other traditions, the aim is awakening of divinity in life. But what does that mean? Well, we could unpack this for years worth of classes, but the short answer is, the Sufis say that creation took place because God was a hidden treasure desiring to be known, to love, and to be loved. And God could only do this through what exists in manifestation, through manifest beings becoming capable of enabling God to realize his or her own being through the experiences of beings in existence. Well, that's still a dualistic way of looking at things. It's a pretty cool one, but it's still dualistic. So here's the paradoxical ways of thinking that we've talked about in previous classes and previous series, particularly in Ibn Arabi's teachings, the great Sufi teacher of the 12 or 1300s, who described human beings as being beings of bi-unity, bi-unity, that we are human-divine beings. And he says that neither side has even an existence without the other. And he says that, and this is really mind-boggling, each side is the creator of the other side. And neither side could exist without the other side. So, I'm going to come back to the opening scene of the Bhagavad Gita in just a minute, but what we'd like you to kind of try to keep in your consciousness during this class is that instead of thinking of awakening as something that you are doing, your usual notion of yourself, something that's happening to you, something that you are changing into by virtue of spiritual practices, by virtue of grace of a teacher, if you have a teacher, instead of that, thinking of awakening as a process of awakening of both sides of the coin, the human side and the divine side awaken together, and only by means of the relationship with each other. Okay, so here's a thought I just had today. We think about, and Hinduism says this, and other traditions too, but particularly in Hinduism, that the world messenger comes, in Hinduism they say this, when Dharma has decayed. And the teachers come to help set humanity aright, to get back on the right path for the reason why there is an existence. But as I've thought more about this, I've thought that I think in reality what happens is that the teachings that have unfolded in the scriptures could only take place to what we think of as the divine side, and could only take place in the transmission that comes through the human side, the messenger, by virtue of the experiences in existence that the divine gains from those experiences in existence. So it's not like this messenger comes, God looking down and going, boy, things are really messed up right now. We could sure think of God up there somewhere thinking that about the world right now. Instead of that, when the messenger comes, it is the answer to a cry of humanity, as the Sufis say, but the message that is revealed is only revealed by what is drawn forth from the human side of things. So, back to the opening scene of the Bhagavad Gita. Here's Krishna responding to Arjuna's questions, and there's many questions Arjuna asked him during the course of this scripture, and he talks about Dharma. It's your purpose to do this, that you have to do this, and he helped him understand why, that there was so much more to what was going on than what he could see. So let me do a little segue over here to science, which some of you heard us talk about. William Tiller's research on subtle energy, where he's done experiments, which I won't go into again, but he's shown that whenever something comes about that makes a linkage between subtle energy and ordinary reality, the properties of that ordinary reality are changed. Now there's things possible that weren't possible before. So apply this to the opening scene in the Bhagavad Gita. When Arjuna and Krishna, there's kind of a duo here, can bring forth this way of being that's not the usual, I can't do this, and all the thoughts about it, but be in a different state of consciousness in relationship to what's going on, then the whole situation is transformed. Even though if you're a witness on the sidelines watching it, it may not look one bit different to you, but something dramatic has changed. Something has opened up in this. So we think about our spiritual path as enabling our awakening, but think about this, we are enabling the awakening of the divine being at the same time through our awakening, and it only takes place in what we call the barzakh, the meeting place between the two.
So much more is happening, and so how do we tune in to the action here that we're talking about? What were you calling it? The awakening is one way of thinking about it, or the
process of what's going on.
Process, right, process. Well, that's kind of hard for us to keep in our minds.
Or the way of relating to what's going on, the modality of relationship.
Okay, and so looking at the way we've talked about it in our book, we're thinking about the human divine. We're talking about, so our chapter for this week was about how to live in the world as a human divine being. And we're thinking of this process of the human divine being. So it's not two nouns, right? It is a verb. And it is something that we keep repeating. You'll hear our stories over and over again. And why is that? Because it's hard to get. And so we keep going from this angle, from that angle, and there's similar stories, but they're coming in from a different vantage point. And one thing that seems when we say, well, as a human divine being, it sounds like we're already cooked. Now, okay, here we are now, we're calling ourselves human divine beings. So, well, there's a lot more cooking for sure that we are needing to do. In fact, that's being a human. And that cooking involves difficulties, right? And being in the midst of disappointments, chaos, sickness, all these things that are our way. And Don has talked about it as a portal to the divine, going through this process. And after a while, the process feels very different too, because now it doesn't seem like it's you as a loner going through it. We start to identify more with the different levels of our being, the angels being here, the divine as all these beings that are manifest, our sweetheart friends that are with us in that. Nature is with us in that. And we begin to start to feel a process, even though we can't define it very well. But one of the important parts of what happens in this is that we're going to be bouncing back and forth from a feeling of wellness and wholeness. Maybe after the class, we go out and we're feeling, oh, I'm feeling that good. And then something happens, and we are so conditioned by what we see around us, the superficial kinds of things, that all of that goodness that I say sometimes we're working those muscles of spirituality, that, you know, we work those, but that's not the part that stays with us. What usually stays with us is what we see on the outside and happenings. Something happens and now we're just totally in the dark again. We go, how can that happen? You know, I had been doing so well and now I'm back. So I'm going to talk to you about that moment of going back in the darkness again. Because this is the nuts and bolts of spirituality, as you have been we've advertised. And I want you to be thinking about these different parts of your existence and what you do when this happens, okay? And I call it Precious One. There is a treasure that you hold that you don't even know you have. It may wake you up at night, startle you out of sleep, or make you feel bad compared with something you saw as pure and beautiful. So here you're getting confronted by something. This is the raw material of transformation. Okay, this grunginess. That's what you work with, okay? So we'll start to think about it as, okay, this is all right, this is where we start. This is the raw material. You at your most vulnerable, most manifest, most separate. So we'll start to identify that. Oh, I see that. This is part of the awareness or presence that I was talking about last week, being present. But also the most connected with the needy self. Now you are kind of being witness to that really needy self and uncovered from masks that, not these, but other masks that we wear that are like Band-Aids that hide the wound that really needs healing. Identify with that? Don't cover it up. Take this precious self to meditation. You are raw and ready for the gift. We'll see it as a moment there, a moment of possibility. Now hold the self in compassion. This self is a strong magnet that's ready for sure transformation that the Divine One can't resist. So think of this magnet that it's like so miserable and so deep and so raw that the Divine is paying total attention. Is feeling this drawing now, very strong. Focus on your heart, offer it up. It is the altar. Don't try to find the new you. That's a tendency to, okay, now what am I going to be? No, you haven't been invented yet. There's the thought. You will be born anew each moment from the hopes and dreams of us all. That's the process. Let the transformation begin. So I want you to get a little breath of this right now through your mask as best you can. And we're going to breathe thinking that every time we inhale, we are breathing in newness. That something is coming to us and we do not have a name for it. It's totally new. You are being reinvented so that you can take this with you for those moments. All right, so let's just breathe right now. Every breath being different. You're not cooking up anything. You are really noticing. And you won't even be noticing smells or anything with masks on like this. There'll just be that air coming in. And you can imagine that light and that newness. Take a couple more breaths. And this idea is something for you to take with you. I know this is not very long for you to have used it, but you kind of strengthen those muscles a little bit so you can remember it. And this is in the same family as the idea of the wounded healer. Many of you have heard about before. It's treasuring that time of the wound and knowing what to do after that in order to stay in the process.
So Sufis talk about something called the allegory of the soul. And there have been some beautiful books written, allegory or story, there's one about the allegory of Avicenna, there's one about the allegory of Ibn Arabi, there's the story of the Prophet Muhammad ascending heaven. But each of us has an allegory of our own soul. So you might think in terms of your allegory like your biography up to date. But that would be just the tiniest slice of the story of your soul. But then you might be thinking, well, I'm hearing about this idea of dharma, purpose, so the divine being must have this script for me that I'm supposed to realize and then enact the script, the plan. So instead of a story which remains to be discovered in each instant, it's like a story that's prefigured that we're supposed to get with the program and then enact. But that's not really what the allegory of the soul is about. Because everything is evolving. Everything in manifestation undergoes a process of evolution. And in addition, what we think of as the divine being in relationship to manifestation also undergoes an evolution. But in actuality, it's the hyphenated relationship between manifestation and the divine that is always undergoing an evolution. So each of us has our own story, and we could say the cosmic divine being has the divine's own grand story, that each of us is a part of that story. Okay. Hazrat Khan has said that there's only one sacred scripture, and that the leaves of the trees are the pages of that scripture. And again, you might think of scripture like I'm looking at some different translations of the Bible in the room that we're in. You might think, well, okay, this scripture is what's been written. It's the sacred books that have been. And there's great treasure trove of wisdom in those, for sure. But the scripture of life is not a finished book. It can't be. It is always unfolding, and the way that we go about relating to our circumstances enables us, as Diane reminded you of, that everything is potentially a portal to the sacred where we can experience that sacredness. So we might think of that in terms of, okay, so now we can partake of the scripture of all the things that are in existence. That's very wonderful. But probably what we're not thinking about is we are contributors to that divine sacred scripture. Our life, soul's allegory is writing new pages of that scripture at every instant. And depending on how alive, how fully alive we are, and that means realizing ourselves as so much more than our physical being in time and space, but realizing ourselves, as we've talked about before, as existing in many levels of vibration, many levels of existence, even if we haven't been able to experience them or access them, but just knowing that they're there and knowing that that is a part of who we are. Knowing that each of us, as even Arvi has said, has access to a unique part of the divine wisdom that no other soul ever could have access to. So each of us is unfolding and contributing to that divine sacred scripture in a way that no other being or anything in existence can do. And so is everything else in existence, which is pretty amazing. So when we're in some kind of circumstance and we're thinking, oh, I wish I was not in this, I wish this person would go away, I wish I was in this setting instead of that setting, what would happen if we could make a shift and realize, even though we have temporarily got caught up in the usual constricted state of consciousness, all this is really a seedbed of the garden of possibilities of emergence of the divine, and emergence in new ways by the way that each of us is in relationship to whatever it is that we are experiencing. So we actually contribute to bringing new things to life by our way of relating to them, which is a pretty far out thought. When you're talking to another person, it's not like you're sitting here going, well, I'm much more spiritually evolved than they are, and I'm going to shed some of my light on them, and then maybe they'll wake up. No, not at all. You're realizing that here's another manifestation of the sacred, and perhaps they haven't realized this in themselves, but if you can connect with that aspect of their being, this principle we talked about called Tawil, seeing beyond the surface appearance of something, the deeper nature of something. If you can relate in that way, then something goes back and forth between the two of you. There is a circulation of light that brings about a new presence, that brings about a new possibility, and, as the commercials go, you also get, it's contributing to the divine wisdom. You're actually synthesizing, in a way, divine wisdom by virtue of that very experience. This, to me, is the ultimate purpose of alchemy. I think existence, if there's a reason why is there existence, it's all about an ongoing emergence of wisdom, deeper and deeper wisdom that can only come about through the relationship between everything with everything else in existence, and the relationship between each part of existence with the transcendent part of that being. So let me read you a little bit from Hazrat Khan. And I'll make this more modern terminology because in his time it was always man and he. So the human may most justly be called the seed of God, the infinite, most conscious within himself, embraces his or her nature full of variety. In this way, God is one and God is all. The whole manifestation is just like a tree sprung from the divine root. Nature is like its stem, and all the aspects of nature are like the branches, the leaves, the fruit, and the flowers, and from this tree, again, the same seed is produced, the human soul, which was the first cause of the tree. I'll read that again, it's amazing. The whole manifestation is just like a tree sprung from the divine root. Nature is like its stem, and all the aspects of nature are like the branches, the leaves, the fruit, and the flowers. And from this tree again the same seed is produced, the human soul, which was the first cause of the tree. This seed is the human, their spirit, and as God constitutes the whole universe within God's self, being single, so the human constitutes within themselves the whole universe as God's miniature. Thus, neither can God be anything other than what God is, nor can the human, for the very reason that God is one, and at the same time, God is all. This applies to both.
Beautiful. And we planned before, we always have notes that we bring in here, and it's always fun to see how far away from the notes we are. It's like we've advanced it several times since then, what it is that we're saying. But one of the things that I loved is that that the human being is the bridge between heaven and earth, which is what he was definitely saying, and that we are God's barzakh. We are God's, I don't know, lab. Sometimes I think of it as God's process, God's interface, God's, I don't know, I think our son works in a laboratory. He's a scientist, so it's his science lab of what we are participating in. Go ahead.
So I was thinking back to the Bhagavad Gita. Here's the two sides, but we are the field on which the story takes place.
Nice. Okay. And so some of our, when I say presence, we need presence. Remember I said compassion, and we need our imaginations, true imaginations, to really be able to see through what seems like these separate beings and the truth behind that. So we need to be able to see what things seem to be just separate things that, like time, or, the illusion of people being separate, and we begin to feel the stream, the unity, the excitement, the sparkliness that is in back of our usual thinking. We become sensitized to that. So our little feelers, like if we were little butterflies, here's the good stuff, okay, here's the good stuff. And we let it run through us and refresh us and inspire us to bring things forth, to bring forth poetry and music. And, love for your family that you got to visit on this wonderful trip that you took. And then working together with other people to learn things together, and, be expressing yourself through art. Let this genius come through. It's like, genius, I don't know. No, it is the love that you have, the compassion, the beautiful feeling you have of giving when you can be out there giving out the food pantry right now. Remember I was talking last time about all the little touches, like making a painting. Every time you touch the canvas, it's like building something in the barzakh, in this special, mysterious science lab thing that we are doing. And we feel the strength of that. I know that anyone that's in this room right now feels what that is like. When you're reading a Hafiz poem, or writing your own poem, or loving your dog. There's this beautiful harmony that's happening in there. And we can pull it away from the separate feeling, right? We keep reminding ourselves of that. And what is that doing for the divine? Great excitement, great joy, fulfillment. So our little difficulties, our little efforts at doing anything are so dignified by that one idea that the divine is always not only witnessing, but becoming something new through the beings that are created through us.
So last time we talked about Hosmer Nitron had a metaphor of the circulation of the divine through the veins of nature, which I just love. I think that's one of my favorite things that he said. But I was thinking, well, how do we both enable and participate in that circulation? Well, our very soul is what enables that circulation to take place between the two sides of what is. And what are the two sides? One side is manifestation, and the other side is the transcendent. So if we're just not awake to anything and we're just passive, well, circulation goes on. But when we are conscious, then we enable much more to come through. So think of an example of fiber optic cable, which is the way that the internet often comes through. Well, you could lay a fiber optic cable and not connect it to anything, and you just have some wires. It wouldn't do anything. Or you could hook it up to something that only had just the tiniest bit of information that went through, a certain amount of light that went through. Or you could hook it up to fiber optic cable that connects to everything that's on the internet. So now there's so much more coming through. But that's just in the level of manifestation. As we've said before, we exist on many levels of vibration and many levels of reality. And when we can awaken to that in our own being, now we're enabling a circulation much more fully to take place between those levels, both descending and returning. And what happens? There's the light that descends, then there's the wisdom gained from our experiences in life, and there's the light that returns. That light has been augmented in a unique way through each of us. And this process is going on all the time, and it's not like you think, oh, down, up, down, up. There's not a good word for it. It's all the parts happening and affecting all the other parts constantly. But to the extent that we've awakened to the depth and preciousness and the beauty and the reality of who we really are, now what is enabled to the source of our being, the divine being, is exponentially more than what can come through just through what we usually know about through our personal experience. So that circulation takes place much more fully when we live our dharma, when we're fulfilling our purpose, which again is our way of going about doing what we're doing that fulfills the deepest passion of our soul. So it could be any kind of thing. Our son, the scientist, his passion for science, a musician, an artist, a parent, someone doing service. In India, there's the different castes. There's the kshatriya, the warrior. It could be fulfilled through the warrior. It could be fulfilled through the business person. But it's the yearning for the connection.
The mother or the father.
Right. It's the yearning for this circulation and connection. Our yearning to connect with the source of our being and the divine beloved, and the yearning for the divine beloved to have a forward thrust in manifestation so the divine can now know more and more than was possible for the divine to know before. And all of us in manifestation are participants in this unfolding story. So if we don't like the way the story is going, and there's a lot going on in the world right now not to be too happy about, well, why don't we see what we can do to rewrite the story? And it doesn't necessarily mean that in our separated sense of self, we're going to go out and do something that's going to hugely change things. but by our conscious way of aligning with our experiences, our conscious way of aligning with other beings with similar intentions, the power of that is so much more than the collective separate power of any number of people doing either what we think of as good or bad. And I think that is the only way the world is going to transform. I think that's the only way that we're going to solve problems that humanity's been stuck in since humans learned how to walk upright. But we can participate in this. I think of the scriptures that have been, if you will historically look at them, they're kind of like the God's journal or the human divine journal throughout time. And they're descriptive of the state of the relationship between human beings and the consciousness at that time and the divine being. And some of the scriptures, like the Upanishads, profound wisdom, are much more aimed at the transcendent. And then there's other ones, like Bhagavad Gita, got right into the nitty-gritty of life and so on. So I think if we have a sense, we are making new scripture by our very life. That's pretty cool. You know, we are unfolding a newness to the sacred story of life itself, to the sacred story of existence itself. And I can't think of a better reason to want to participate in some process that helps us to foster our own awakening. And that could be so different for different people. It's not necessarily going to be sitting and doing a certain spiritual practice. For some people, that very much is important and a very powerful tool. It might be some other way. So like in yoga, there's the path of devotion, there's the path of service, there's the path of wisdom, and so on. So different people have a natural inclination towards any of these. But when you follow that path that is true to the deepest part of your heart, then you are living your Dharma and you are enabling this unfoldment of the sacred scripture.
So can you imagine how precious it is the moment that you discover that here we've been trying to get to this amazing thing, you know, like this human divine, out there somewhere, and you realize that it's by being your unique self that you get there. By making your heart, the depths of your heart, joyous. By doing what brings light in your being. A simple thing. I'm remembering Buddhists, the Buddhist tea ceremony, where what are they doing? They're preparing tea. They are warming, I'm not sure all the steps, but you have a cup and you're pouring into the cup, and every movement is conscious and present. You are in the moment. How simple that that we can become the bridge of all of the realms in the smallest little thing, the uniqueness of our own being. I hope you get a little whiff of what that's like.
So let me read you one more passage of Hasranai Khan. The word huma, H-U-M-A, in Persian stands for a fabulous bird. There's a belief that if the huma bird sits for a moment on the head of anybody, it's a sign that they will become a king or queen. Its true explanation is that when a person's thoughts so evolve that they break all limitation, then they become as a king or queen. It is a limitation of language that can only describe the Most High as something like, usually a king. It is said in the old traditions that Zoroaster was born of a huma tree, this of God. In the word huma, hu represents the spirit, and the word ma, M-A-H, in Arabic means water. In English, the word human explains two facts which are characteristics of humanity. Hu means God, and man, M-A-N, means mind. The idea of the God-conscious human. In other words, who, God, is in all things and beings, but it is man, woman, by whom God is known. Human, therefore, may be said to mean God conscious, God realized, or God human. Human divine being. So now let's do a meditation, so close your eyes. And give free rein to your imagination. So what's nice about imagination is you don't have to know how to make something happen, and you don't even have to be actually experiencing, in quotes, what you're imagining. It's enough just to imagine it. So imagine that what we've been talking about here in this class is true, that you are a human divine being, even if you've never had any experience close to that, and even if you feel so far away from what other people might describe as the divine or the transcendent, you feel so caught up in your circumstances, but just imagine that you are this being of bi-unity, as even Arby described it. And imagine that your journey of awakening is the divine's journey of awakening as well. It's not you trying to awaken to this omniscient God sitting up there knowing everything that ever happened and is going to happen. What we think of as the divine or God, and even Arby would say your personal Lord, can't possibly know what is yet to become through the experiences gained in your life. And what the divine gains from the experiences in your life is absolutely not only gained by wonderful, blissful experiences in meditation. It is gained every bit as much, and probably much more as much, by all the difficulties that you're in, the times that you get the most caught up. And this is like the outer fringes of the divine consciousness awakening in existence at the same time as you are awakening to it. So it's not formed yet. It's not this smooth path you just sail on down. It's carved out, just like the construction going on outside the building that we're in. Sometimes things are a total mess. But your way of relating to, even if it's just a concept at first, even if it's just a belief that you take because maybe you have some trust in other beings who have given guidance on the spiritual journey, that all of this is part of your journey of awakening. And Hasbernat Khan has this beautiful statement. He says, drink difficulties as wine. And he says that no experience is wasted. He says that every experience that we work through, it's as if it generates a certain chemical in our heart. And every substance generated is of value. And some of them we might think, oh, we don't like these, like sulfur, for instance. Well, sulfur is very important in so many different medications and healing. And someone who's gone through the trials of life, and someone who's found a way to hold their head up and to learn how to let their light shine through in the midst of difficulty, now has a precious gift that becomes available to others that may be in that circumstance, if for nothing else than to give them hope, to know that you've been able to work through it, and so can they. That we all have those possibilities. That our lives, our circumstances, are this field, like the field on which the whole Bhagavad Gita takes place. It's like the soil that at first looks like just a wasteland. It's just weeds and bramble and caked up dirt, and you think, how can anything grow here? But through our experiences, it's as if we're tilling the soil. We're turning all of the stuff that seemed to be useless into compost that can become the soil, the seedbed for new possibilities to emerge. It's like giving the divine fertile ground on which to blossom into life. Like that passage I read a while ago about the soul, the seed becomes the seed of the tree, which engendered the soul itself. And the fruit of the seed of our soul is something so precious that we bring as a gift to the world. And we bring it as a gift to the divine being. And we may not think that we could possibly have that in us. But we do, you do. Everyone sitting here live, this class, everyone listening to this recording on YouTube later on, I will tell you with confidence and certainty that you have the seeds of divine possibilities in your being that can bring forth flowers and fruits to be found nowhere else in all of creation. And your way of engaging in relationship with other expressions of the divine in life, which are people, things in nature, inanimate objects, situations, or whatever, the circulation of light that takes place in that, now is bringing new possibilities to the seeds. It's like it's changing the DNA, spiritual DNA of the seeds, so now new things are possible that were never possible before. And what a delight to us on the manifest side of things. What a delight to the divine being that something new arises. Can you imagine, with an anthropomorphic sense of the old idea of God, God sitting up there, God knows everything that ever has been and ever will be. Imagine that you turn on Netflix or Amazon Prime and you've watched every show 10 billion times. You're probably going to get pretty bored and wish there was something new going on. Well, I think the divine delights in the newness as yet unknown, that's yet to emerge in existence, that can only take place through us. So when we can engage in our life in this way, we become, in a sense, the fertilizer, the sunlight for other emergent seeds in creation. We become the soil in which this growth can take place. And the way what we receive from all that we relate to serves the same function for our own being. It's germinating new seeds in our own soul. So again, give free rein to your imagination. We are in a never-ending symphony of light of every vibrational level, visible and far beyond the scope of what we can perceive. Subtle realms, what the Sufis call the uncreated light, the all-pervading light, the light of all of the divine qualities of love and joy and compassion and wisdom, the energy of pure spirit. We are not only what enables the circulation of the divine through the veins of nature, but we are what circulates through the veins of nature. Our soul is not limited to a certain spatial area. We are co-present with everything in every level of existence. So as Christ said, let us not hide our light under a bushel. Let our light shine. Let your light shine. Let yourself, in times of darkness, be open to receiving the light that is being given by so many other expressions of the divine in life and in realms beyond the physical realm. Pour upon us thy love and thy light. Pour upon us thy love and thy light. Pour